Today, we're going to be doing a comparison that so many of you guys commented and asked about. We're comparing the brand new 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro with the new 10th generation Intel processors against the 16-inch MacBook Pro and finding out which one you should spend your hard-earned money on, how much of a performance difference do we have going up to the 16-inch, or can you get away with just getting this 13-inch that's much more compact, smaller, and also lighter. We're not only going to be comparing the performance of the CPU and the graphics, we're also going to be talking about the keyboards, the design, the displays, the webcams, speakers, and much more. Let's start out with the physical differences and what these guys opened up. You guys could see that even though on paper 16-inch doesn't seem like that much bigger than 13.3, in reality it is a massive difference. The screen is much larger, the whole body is much larger, and if you guys could tell, the bezels are slimmer on the 16-inch. Apple put in a larger display, whereas the 13.3-inch is the same. Apple did not upgrade to a 14-inch, and recently there's been even more leaks and rumors about the 14-inch not coming probably for at least another year. So if you guys are waiting on that, that's probably gonna be a long wait. Now let's go ahead and close these guys up. I'm gonna stack the 13-inch on top of the 16-inch here, just to give you guys a size difference. It is pretty substantial, and if you're used to 13-inch, this thing seems massive. Along with that, we have weight differences. 13-inch is just over 3 pounds compared to this is 4.3, but it does feel a lot heavier in the hand. With that said, it's pretty surprising that the thickness is almost identical. And one really great thing about this higher-end 13-inch is that it also has 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, just like the 16-inch, so you're not limited in connectivity. Opening these back up, the 16-inch was the first MacBook to get Apple's Magic Keyboard. This has more key travel, it is more reliable, it uses scissor switches, much better than the butterfly keyboard. Apple now brought that to the 13-inch MacBook Pros. It's an identical keyboard. The touch bar is now separated from the escape key, so that is excellent. The keyboards are identical. The trackpads are also identical. They're excellent as far as the technology and how they work. The 16-inch one is larger, and it is absolutely massive, but it is excellent, and it does a good job with rejecting palms and anything like that. The last physical difference is the speaker grills. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is much larger, so it has larger speaker grills, and Apple definitely packs some great speakers in here. We'll do a comparison here in just a bit, but first let's talk about the displays. Both of these screens are excellent. They're all nice and bright, 500 nits with good anti-reflectivity coatings, and they both have a high pixel density. The 13-inch has just over 4 million pixels, whereas the 16-inch has 5.9 million pixels, but because the screen is larger, it about evens out. One thing that I do have to mention is that if you're a professional, you're doing photo editing, especially video editing, graphics design, it definitely is nicer to have this larger screen. You have more space for tools, for settings. Not that you can't do it on the 13-inch, but you do notice a difference, and it is more comfortable as long as you can handle the larger size. Both of these displays have excellent color accuracy, and they both are capable of displaying DCI P3 colors, which is about 25% more than your standard sRGB. If you guys see this little box here, you see the logo on the inside. Most laptops cannot display this shade, so if you're a professional, you're working with colors, both are going to be great. And now it's time for our speaker comparison. You guys get your best pair of headphones. Apple made a huge deal about the 16-inch MacBook Pros featuring 6 speakers being their best system for sound. The 13-inch isn't bad either, so let's go ahead and compare them. And I want to let you know that you guys asked for a different song. We finally found one. Let's go ahead. I want to say that was surprising because we just compared the 13-inch to the base model, which has worse speakers, and to the XPS, which has worse speakers, and it sounded fantastic. But now putting it up against the 16-inch, it sounds bad, and it actually doesn't sound bad. It sounds great, but the 16-inch sounds amazing. Basically, like, you have better bass, you have crisper highs, but the mids stand out so much. I only noticed 1 decibel difference on my Apple Watch as far as volume, but the sound quality difference is huge. Both of these MacBooks feature 720p webcams, so this is the quality of the video and audio you can get from the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And this is the webcam and microphone quality from the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And Apple calls the microphones in this MacBook Pro studio quality, so you guys let me know what differences you noticed down in the comments section below. And now it's time to talk about performance, and I know you guys are all waiting for this. The 13-inch is very interesting because we finally have better CPU and much better graphics performance. So some people are wanting to downsize from a larger laptop, and we're gonna find out how much a performance difference is there. We're gonna start out with Geekbench 5. I'm gonna go ahead and run it. Another very interesting thing is that this year, for this model, Apple has given us 16 gigs of RAM base. We don't have to spend extra money for that. That's great. They've never done that before. We also have 512 gigs of SSD, just like the 16-inch. We have 10th gen processors, whereas the 16-inch, this one has 9th gen, which are basically the same as 8th gen. This is a 6-core, so this is gonna get interesting. And we have our results, and they are interesting. As far as single core, the 13-inch MacBook Pro is about 15% faster. Now, single core is used for some very simple tasks, and even for some video editing, like generating waveforms. That's usually single task that is being used. Now, as far as multi-core, our 16-inch with its 6-core processor gets close to 30% higher performance, which might make a difference in photo editing and video editing, which we'll test in just a bit. And I just mentioned that both of these have 512 gig SSDs, so let's go ahead and do a Blackmagic speed test, see if we see any differences. So right away, as far as write, it is a little bit higher, and as read, even more so. I'll let it go one more time here. So it looks like we have about 100 megabytes per second faster on the write with the 16-inch, and about 600 megabytes per second faster with read speed. So there is a difference, even though the SSDs are the same size, but with most tasks, you're not gonna notice a difference. And now let's touch on the graphics. I'm gonna run Geekbench 5's metal test. This is probably one of the biggest differences between these laptops. The 13-inch MacBook Pro has integrated graphics built into the CPU, and even though it's a big improvement compared to last year, the 16-inch has a dedicated graphics card. And here we have the scores. We have practically 10,000 for the 13-inch and basically 25,000 for the 16-inch. That is a massive difference. Even though we have much better, much more powerful graphics with the new 2020 compared to 2019 13-inch, 16-inch still is way ahead. Let's take a look at gaming. This is Unigine Heaven. It's a gaming benchmark, and right off the bat, the 16-inch looks really smooth. We're getting 40 frames per second compared to about 13 for this scene. That is a big difference. All right, we're about done here. Both of the fans did spin up, but the 16-inch is noticeably louder. But do keep in mind, we're getting much better performance, and that dedicated graphics chip is using a lot more wattage. So here you guys see the difference. We have 13.5 FPS compared to 45. It's a massive difference in terms of gaming. If you're somebody that wants to play games, if you can handle the larger size, you're definitely gonna have a much better experience with the 16-inch. And now it's time to test Cinebench R20, which is gonna give us another look at the thermal performance and fan noise and what these CPUs are capable of when they're put under a 100% load. Say you're rendering, you're transcoding, doing those kind of tasks. So right off the bat, we see 91 watts that the MacBook Pro is using. That's a lot of power for the 16-inch. This one went up to 40 watts. So the 13-inch one has a lower wattage CPU, and that is gonna make a difference in ultimate performance. And the 16-inch, even though we have 6 cores, it's right now hitting 3.6 gigahertz compared to 3.0 with the 4-core. The 13-inch went up to 100 degrees Celsius fairly quickly, whereas the 16-inch, it is getting hotter now, but it's a much more gradual curve. And what this means is, if you're gonna put a quick 20-second intensive load on the system, the 16-inch is gonna stay silent, where the 13-inch is gonna kick up its fans a little bit earlier. The 16-inch just finished up, and right when it was finishing up, the fans ramped up and got almost as loud as the 13-inch, but it finished the task. And the 13-inch looks like the fans are maxed out now. And the 13-inch is now done. It's got 1,684. That's probably the lowest score that I've seen. One thing that I think maybe if you're plugging it into power, I noticed unplugged it actually got that highest score. So that is interesting. Maybe also with fans there's a difference, whereas the 16-inch got 2,700. So basically another 1,000 points in CPU performance. Now that we know these performance differences in terms of benchmarks, let's see how they actually apply in the real world. We're gonna start out with photo editing using Lightroom. I have 42 megapixel raw images opened up here, and those are no joke. When we're just switching through these photographs, you see there's a little bit of a delay. That's because I already have a bunch of effects stacked on these raw clips. The 16-inch is slightly faster, but not by that much. The 16-inch is super smooth, no issues whatsoever. But the 13-inch also does a surprisingly good job. I'm seeing very little delay. Now let's go ahead and export these 50 images and see the difference we get. So it's been a minute and there's already some very interesting things happening. Both of these computers are using 100% of their CPUs, but the MacBook Pro hit 100 degrees Celsius very quickly. The fans are spinning up, getting loud. 16-inch is silent, and it's at 84 degrees Celsius. It was at 81. It's slowly starting to heat up, but there's a big thermal and noise difference when we're doing this. Now, as far as performance, they're not that far off, surprisingly. Now it's been 2 minutes. The MacBook Pro 13-inch fans are at full blast, whereas the 16-inch is completely silent at 2,700 RPMs. All right, so we have our results, and I want to say first, there are 3 things that surprised me. First, the MacBook Pro 16-inch is much quieter. Second, the GPUs were barely used, so even though we have a much more powerful graphics card, it's really not doing much for photo editing. And third is the speed. The 16-inch took 3 minutes and 11 seconds, and the 13-inch took 3 minutes and 28 seconds. That is barely any difference. It's really insignificant. I was expecting this to take about 50% longer. Now, Vadim and I were talking about why do we have such a little difference, even though the CPUs are maxed out all the way, and I think we found the reason, and that is the RAM speed difference. Both are using DDR4 RAM, but this is using 2,600 megahertz RAM compared to 3,700, so 40% faster RAM. And in the past, we noticed that for photo editing, RAM matters much more than a lot of other things. So having this faster RAM is making up for the difference in CPU performance. That is crazy. So if you're a photo editor and you want to get a smaller laptop, this 13-inch is going to do an excellent job, and you're not missing out on much. And if you're a professional, we would suggest going for 32 gigs of RAM. We have noticed that it makes a difference having more RAM as well for photo editing, and it will actually get faster. It's great we have that option now. And now let's talk about video editing. I have Final Cut Pro opened up here. This is a simple project, but I do have film grain applied. I also have 2 LUTs applied, which are kind of like filters, but it's a little bit more elaborate what it's doing to the colors. And if I go ahead and play this back, both these laptops actually handle it fairly well. And the fact that Apple switched over to the 10nm chips with the better graphics really helps out on the 13-inch MacBook Pro. It's doing way better than it did before, and the 16-inch obviously is not going to have any issues with this. I'm going to go ahead and export this, and we'll see what kind of a time difference we get. So we're about 2 minutes into the render, and I noticed something very interesting. The 13-inch MacBook Pro, it's only using about 20% of its 4-core processor compared to the 16-inch, which is using almost 50% of its 6 cores, and that is because the graphics card is limiting the 13-inch. Even though we have the better graphics card now, it's still not enough to keep up with everything, where this thing, the graphics card is maxed out and the CPU is at 50%. Another interesting thing is that the fans are spinning up quite loud now on the 16-inch because we're pushing so much power to the graphics card, the CPU, where the 13-inch, unlike photo editing, it is silent right now. That's interesting. So obviously the graphics are holding it back, but if you're interested in seeing a video like this, maybe a performance video, but adding an external graphics card unit, an eGPU, to the 13-inch, let us know down in the comment section. Make sure you guys have notifications enabled. All right, and that took 3 minutes and 36 seconds on the 16-inch for a 5-minute project. 4K with all these effects, so it's faster than real time, whereas the 13-inch was only at 33% done so far. And I actually did this rendering test earlier. It took 9 minutes and 58 seconds. So obviously that is a pretty big difference. The 16-inch is 3 times as fast in video editing if you have a couple effects, compared to just slightly faster in photo editing. Now, the 13-inch is still very capable. It still does a good job, especially in Final Cut. And if you want to see what kind of video editing it can handle, I'll leave a link down in the video description below to my filmmaking channel. And I have a video up right now about this machine and how it can edit. And I'm also going to be doing a more in-depth video editing comparison between the 16 and the 13. So if you guys want to see that video, make sure you guys are subscribed to the link in the video description. And now let's talk about battery life. Now, Apple rates the 16-inch MacBook Pro at 11 hours of use compared to 10 hours for the 13-inch, but that is just for video playback with the screens being fairly dim. If you're doing, mixed use in the real world, the 13-inch MacBook Pro will get 7 to 8 hours of battery life, and the 16-inch will get 6 to 7 hours, a little bit worse. And that is because it has a lot more powerful hardware. The CPU will use more wattage, the wattage spikes higher, and the dedicated graphics card, even though it does switch back and forth between integrated, when it's using that dedicated, it uses a lot more wattage. Now, if you're going to be doing something like photo editing or maybe even worse, video editing on battery power, the 16-inch will get around 3.5 hours of video editing compared to about 5 hours of video editing for the 13-inch because it has a lot less power that it is drawing. Now, of course, these do use USB Type-C for charging, so we would highly suggest buying a USB Type-C power bank that can output a high wattage, and that way you can not only not lose any of your battery power when you're on the go, you can actually charge up the battery at the same time while doing some of these tasks. We're going to leave a link in the video description to an excellent one that we highly recommend. And now let's talk about prices and our final verdict on which one you should buy for your specific use task. So originally the price difference was $600, but it got a lot more difficult, more complex. The previous MacBook Pro, it only came with 256 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of RAM. So once you add up to 16 gigs and 512, there was only a $200 price difference. And it made it even more difficult a few months after the 16-inch came out when these were discounted, which you can actually get them right now for about $200 off. We'll leave some links in the video description, and the price was the same. And then you're choosing between much better performance or the smaller form factor. Now, Apple made 16 gigs standard, 512 standard, and the price difference is even bigger than before, and which kind of makes it tough. Now, if you're somebody that is doing photo editing and you like the more compact size, this is a killer deal right now. Now, if you're somebody that does graphics design, you do, say, video editing, especially if you're gaming, we would highly recommend, if you can deal with the larger size and a little bit heavier weight, go for the 16-inch. We're seeing a massive difference in exporting 4K video, in gaming performance. The graphics card really helps out in that way. And for $200 off right now, you're getting a really good value as well. As for those of you guys who are doing coding or you're doing music production and those types of tasks, I think the 13-inch is also an excellent value. The CPU performance is better, the single core performance is better, graphics performance is better, and now for the first time ever, you can actually get 32 gigs of RAM on a 13-inch, and that definitely matters for some of those tasks to be able to run multiple applications. Some people are doing virtual machines, and previously you had to go up to a 15 or a 16-inch in order to get 32 gigs of RAM. You don't have to do that anymore. So the 13-inch is actually much more capable now than before. It fits a lot more different use cases, and it's an excellent machine. Let us know your guys' thoughts down in the comments section below, and click that circle above if you guys want to subscribe, and as well, you can enable those notifications. If you want to see a couple other great videos, we have some right over there. This has been Max with Max Tech, and I'll see you in the next video.